Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a public sector catering webinar. Today's webinar is tackling the subject of how we must love British food and our local suppliers. And we have a panel who will be talking us through that, and an interview as well with Alexia Robinson, Director at Love British Food. We'll then have some short presentations from Jeanette Orrey from Food for Life and Preston Walker and James Ball from Oak House Kitchen, before hearing some views from the Good Food Partnership and going on to a Q&A, answering your questions. As we just wait for people to log in, if you want to pose questions, please do use the Q&A rather than the chat. But please do use the chat to talk to other people that are logged in. I'll just leave it another 30 seconds or so for people to be able to join, and then I will pass you live. Just got a few more people dropping in. As I say, please do use the chat to let people know that you're here, and use the Q&A for posing any questions you have for the panel, for Alexia and the panel. Okay, I think we're probably settling down now, so I'm going to pass over to David Fode, Group Editor of Public Sector Catering, who will be your chair for today. Over to you, David.
Good morning, and thank you, Andrew, for that. Yes, I'm David Fode, editor of Public Sector Catering magazine, and thank you for joining us for our latest of our public sector catering webinars. Today we're going to be addressing the issue of buying British and sourcing more local food. The old-fashioned virtues of buying local seasonal food rather went out of fashion as international travel and globalized trade opened our eyes to a whole new world of flavour. That has definitely improved the quality and variety of food on our shopping lists and on our menus, but it has at the same time cut many of us off from a knowledge and appreciation of what's grown in our own national backyard. The growing demand for sustainability in all aspects of life, however, has now swung attention back onto local produce as one way that we can reduce our impact on the environment, among other things. It's a trend that got impetus from the COVID lockdown last summer. You may remember when many of us rediscovered the joys of growing fruit and veg in our back gardens and allotments. But more importantly, and obviously, we've started to think more locally with the departure of the UK from the European Union. The public sector should be fertile ground for the idea of growing local food. But is it engaging with local farmers and growers and suppliers? I suppose here to answer those questions and others, we're today joined by Alexia Robinson, founder of the Love British Food campaign, which promotes British food and farming to the food service sector. And for the last 2 years, she's been named as one of the top 20 most influential people by Public Sector Catering magazine. So good morning, Alexia.
Good morning, David. Morning, everybody. If I can just start by reassuring you all that I am not a cat.
Okay,
I am the founder of Love British Food. And I'm much looking forward to talking to you, David.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm going to be talking to her about the work that she does around local sourcing. But before we do that, I'd also like to introduce you to the other people who will be involved in today's webinar. We have Jeanette Orrey, the original school dinner lady who made her name by going out and building relationships with local farmers and suppliers when she was a catering manager at St Peter's Primary School in East Bridgford, Nottinghamshire. Good morning, Jeanette.
I'm on mute. That's a first mistake.
Right. And we've also got Preston Walker and James Ball, who've been working together in the catering team at Oak House residential home since 2015 and set up Oak House Kitchen in 2017 to provide catering consultancy and training to the healthcare sector. So good morning, Preston, and good morning, James.
Good morning. Good morning, David. How are you?
Okay, thank you. Just before we get started, a quick reminder about how the webinar is going to work. Other than the panelists and me, everyone will be muted. If you want to get in touch during the webinar, put a question to the panelists, use the Q&A function, please. Do include your name and company, and keep this to questions rather than statements or comments. We obviously won't have time, on the question of time, you don't have to wait until we start the Q&A section to put your questions. You can put them at any time. And the other way to get involved today is to share a comment. I use the chat function for that. Remembering to choose the option to all panelists and attendees. Right. The first British Food Fortnight was held in 2001 following the foot and mouth crisis. It was the idea of Alexia Robinson, and in 2002, she launched the campaign organisation behind it, Love British Food. She has described herself as a Dorset girl fueled by a passion for the rural life she enjoyed as a child. She says, I'm a country girl and care passionately about the British countryside and rural way of life. My mantra is no sheep, no cows, no countryside. If we don't buy British and support our farmers, it won't be long before we don't have any farms, have to rely much more on imported food of questionable quality, and the countryside will become a rural theme park. So quite a statement from you there, Alexia. So can we start first by getting you to tell us a little bit more about British Food Fortnight and Love British Food?
Well, I mean, you've just summed up completely. You've summed up why I set it up. That was the passion behind it. But do you know, to everyone listening, it's incredible to think back to 20 years ago, whatever. There was no promotion of British food at all back then. British food was not. It wasn't something that we talked about as a nation with pride. The foot and mouth crisis had just hit. Farming was on the cover of every single national newspaper. It was on its knees. And I had what really was just a very simple idea that I thought we just need to galvanise the British public to get excited about British food. We need to encourage people to seek British food out when they're shopping, to pause when they're looking at a menu and actively look for it when they're eating in a pub or in a restaurant. It was the time when, those big awareness events were all becoming part of our sort of national calendar. I mean, of course, the most famous one, I think, is Red Nose Day. But so British Food Fortnight was food's first awareness event on the national calendar. And it got established very quickly. I was tremendously inspired by a wonderful man who I think many of your listeners will know, a man called Bob Cotton, who at the time was head of the British Hospitality Association. And I had just a chance meeting with him, and he took me to one side and he said, Alexia, with this crisis in rural Britain, no one is talking to me and my members, no one. And he said, do you realise all of my members put together buy more food than all the retailers? And he said, but no one's talking to us. And so when I set British Food Fortnight up, it from the very start had food service at the heart of it. Because as you say, David, I'm a country girl. I don't want, I'm quite practical. I don't want to do things that other people are doing already. So we wanted to work in an area that I felt was quite neglected. So that was the roots of it all.
Okay. You obviously identified food service as a particular focus for the campaign. Within food service, our special interest here is obviously the public sector, schools, hospitals, prisons, care homes, the military, universities, as an example. How important are they to the aims of what you're trying to do?
Well, look, the public sector buys £2.6 billion worth of food. It has the potential to be British farming's biggest customer. The example I love using is milk. Hospitals are probably the biggest purchaser of milk. They buy, on average, 1 pint per patient per day. Look at that as a customer for our struggling dairy sector. So to me, farming and the public sector need to be working side by side. I am passionate about achieving that. The potential for the public sector is to be British farming's #1 customer is just tremendous. And then looking at the other side, that the public sector, look at their social role, look at the role they have, on feeding the vulnerable, the sick, the young, the elderly. the interest amongst catering managers in making sure that they have the highest quality nutritional food for those in their care is just tremendous. And what's the best way of delivering that? To make sure that we give those people, it's a social responsibility, I feel, as much as anything else, to give them access to the best food systems that exist in the world. And British Food truly does deliver that.
Okay. I suppose one of the criticisms, if you like, that gets raised from time to time from public sector catering buyers is that locally sourced food can be either too expensive or too difficult to source. Is that an area of concern to you?
Oh, this is the nub of the issue. This has been the big barrier. Price, cost, always comes back to that. But I think we need to start to turn the conversation on this to one about value. So we talk about what are the values that we're talking about, because of course, when you're talking the public sector, it's all about value for money. But value for money in the public sector is not just about cost. As I said previously, the role of the public sector in delivering nutritionally quality food to the sick, the elderly, the young, the vulnerable, those in our care, is just tremendous. We can't just, I mean, to prioritize price and cost over that, when you look at that part of society, I mean, I don't think anyone would sign up to that. So the other thing that has been really encouraging, look, David, you know, we work with Love British Food, we work with the most fantastic group of stakeholders across the industry. People on this call who, quite frankly, I now think of as friends. They're like part of the Love British Food family, and working all together. We've got examples across the country, across this sector, showing where there are hospitals, where there are schools who are prioritising sourcing local, sourcing British. And they've proven again and again that it's actually, more often than not, cost neutral. And there are other savings. I mean, I think the campaign that the Public Sector Catering magazine started about 20% less meat, but more focusing on more quality meat. I mean, you know how nervous I was about that to start with, but actually, I think it's got a very good point. I mean, using meat as an example, put less meat on the menu, but put quality meat on the menu. So put British meat on the menu. Again, a cost neutral exercise. At the moment, we're just putting, and I'm going to be launching hopefully next week, a new public procurement hub on the Love British Food website, where we will have all of these case studies, care homes, schools, hospitals, universities, who are working with local suppliers. And I hope that others in the industry can then go to that hub and look at some of these examples, see what they've done, for example, up in Nottingham. It's just see what Phil Shelley is doing down in Taunton Musgrave, and it will reassure people that this debate needn't just be about price. I mean, we're talking about challenges, though. I think there certainly are. Price isn't the only barrier to this. I don't know if you wanted to come on to that later on in the conversation, but there are a lot of other things I think need to change in the sector to make it easier to source British. I'm sure you're going to probably come on to that in the.
Well,
preempt you.
Talked very well there about the sort of the price and value argument, but obviously the local sourcing issue also brings in to the argument the issues of sustainability and animal welfare. So how does British produce stack up when you're looking at those factors as well?
I think again, you've touched on something that is so important. Sustainability and animal welfare is now top at the forefront of everyone's minds, whether it is in terms of your customers, those who you're actually feeding, or whether it is from a wider society accountability. Now, does British food equal more sustainable, higher animal welfare? Yes, it does. And therefore, again, when I'm talking about values, this is not some patriotic bashing exercise, though, of course, by buying British, you're feeding into the local economy. But when we're talking about the values, we are talking about the public sector playing a leading role in supporting the values of sustainability, higher animal welfare, low carbon impact, reducing air miles, all of those sorts of things. I think the challenge, and I don't know what the answer to this is, but there's a huge challenge in how you communicate that in a public sector environment. It's not just public sector, actually, in the food service environment as a whole. I mean, it's very easy to communicate it on a supermarket shelf with a label. I say easy, actually, that there are obviously issues and a long way to go on delivering an effective system there as well. But when it comes to serving food to a patient in a hospital ward, how do you communicate the fact that you have prioritized sustainability, you've prioritized high animal welfare? I think this is, I mean, I know working with people in the across the sector, there are so many good ideas of how you can do it, but it is a challenge. So one of the things I'll say is it's not just enough to do it, you then need to communicate it.
Okay. Now let's come on to the potentially vexed question of the UK's departure from the European Union. Do you believe it actually offers an opportunity for British food producers in their home market?
Well, the example I love to use is Welsh lamb. I mean, everyone will know from reading the papers that there's huge concern during the Brexit negotiations amongst our sheep farmers because, I mean, so much of our lamb goes into the European market. There's huge demand for it. But it's interesting talking. I do a lot of work with Welsh local authorities. Now, it's very interesting talking to catering managers who are responsible for producing food in Welsh schools. They previously have not been able to afford to buy Welsh lamb. Welsh lamb has gone overseas and they've had to buy New Zealand lamb because it's cheaper. So it's going to be very interesting to see things how play out. But I mean, certainly there is an opportunity, I would say, for more produce that previously was going export to actually be served to the domestic consumer. And that's something I would certainly love to see. I think from a supplier point of view, that they've obviously had the wind put up them. There's a lot of uncertainty. So focusing on the domestic market makes business sense, gives them the reassurance they need to continue to invest in their farming systems and innovation and things. And I think from the sector's point of view, what the whole process of going through Brexit has really shown, and indeed, the whole horrors of COVID and everything we're living through at the moment, is the crucialness of having a robust supply chain of domestic produce, and people want to be closer to their supplier. So I think I think it has really brought this whole matter to a fore, which is to the good.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned the conversations that you have with caterers, and I just wondered, what do you pick up from them as the major challenges they see in being able to buy more British produce?
Well, I mean, three things, actually. First of all, talk about frameworks. Framework, the lack of flexibility amongst frameworks. I mean, I think there's a government white paper out at the moment that actually is looking into all of this, and I think again there is a clear catalyst for change. But these large frameworks are difficult to manage. They're unwieldy, and they make it tricky for catering managers to work with local suppliers. I think from a supplier point of view, I think suppliers find it baffling, if not even frightening, looking at some of the tender requirements. They look at them and their initial response is that they can't meet them. But I think that is surmountable in that what we need to do is encourage caterers to actually work with the suppliers in a team to help them, to guide them, to hold their hand through the process and show them that, look, you think you maybe can't meet these requirements, but actually we want to work with you to help you achieve that. And in many cases, I think that is possible. The other challenge that I wanted to highlight, which is an interesting one, which is I think, I mean, it follows on from what I've just said. I think that for too long, farmers and food producers have thought that the public sector is impenetrable, that it's just not possible for them to access. And so where I find it so interesting working in this area, that for me, the passion and the drive comes from those working in the sector, from the catering managers. They want to do this. And actually, You know, I feel we need to get the supply side. We need to warm them up. We need to excite them. We need to bring them to the table, really, to a customer that is ready there, wanting to work with them. And the final point, actually, David, another thing is an overall challenge, is that I think we need to find a way to make the big food service organisations who get the very big contracts on this, I think we need to find a way to make them publicly accountable. I've had conversations with 2 of them in the last 2 weeks. One, I won't name them, one foreign owned, one British owned. The British owned one, I'm talking about huge organisations. The British one clearly feels that they are accountable in terms of sourcing British. They want to do their bit. They want to prioritise this. It's on their agenda. The foreign owned one is purely thinking about profit. And my concern, and this is something that I wonder will come out of the discussion today, my concern is that all the excitement about the government freeing things up for SMEs to be able to respond to public tenders, my concern is that we're going to get to a point where SMEs are going to be regarded as like the cherry on top of the cake, and these large food service organisations, they will have a smattering of SMEs just to tick the box and say they've done their bit. But the major contracts, the bulk contracts, they will be very tempted to source cheap, source imports, because they'll be thinking about their bottom line. And I think that's particularly the case with the foreign-owned food service organisations, to end on a controversial note.
Well, why not? Thank you very much, Alexia. And now I'd like to turn to someone who's long championed use of local seasonal produce on school menus and helped draw up the blueprint for the Soil Association's Food for Life accreditation scheme. Jeanette, tell us how you think schools can get more involved in buying local.
Okay, thank you, David. And thank you. I'm just waiting for Andrew to start my video. He's saying I can't do this.
Let's hope he's there somewhere.
Is that better? Okay. What I'm going to do this morning, because I've only got 10 minutes, is just whiz you through, and it's not death by PowerPoint, believe me, but just whiz you through a presentation. So Andrew, can you start, please? Okay, so why British food? And I'm going to give you the story at the end of this. So I'm not going to read it. So head teachers asking for change, children, ministers and parents. Next one. Contact with the producer, as Alexia has said, from farm gate to the plate, the produce has got to be available, delivery times are important, continuity of supply is hugely important. Next one. Producers and growers, as Alexia has just said, you've got a very important role to play. You've got to be aware of the market, and for schools, this is 38-week production. Next one. What's the benefits? So local producers and growers have got guaranteed markets, food miles are cut dramatically, and case studies have proved that this is affordable and it's edible. Children will eat it. Next one. Local economy, this is what it means. £10 generates 14 in the local economy if spent in the supermarket, but if you spend it on, let's say, a local organic box, it's £25. Next one. If every consumer switched just 1% to local, this would generate 52 million. So imagine if one local authority did this. Next one. What's the educational impact? Farm visits, cookery lessons, reconnecting farm to fork, and obviously community benefit. Next one. So what happens in real life? The whole community does benefit. Local produce means local jobs, and the local economy benefits. Now, I think the next one, yes. I wanted to finish on a light note. This is me many years ago, as you can imagine. So what does it mean? Is there anything there, Andrew? It means children get to know and they understand their food. And as I say, we support the local economy. Okay, thank you. So it's fresh food, better food, food we can afford, local jobs for local people. Thanks, Andrew. The reason why I've shown that is because I started this obviously 21 years ago, as most people know. That was taken from a presentation that I did in 2005. So that's where 52 million, so that's way out of date, but it just shows you we are still talking about this subject all of those years ago. And it is happening in many, many schools. But there are still a lot of challenges. Those challenges is that if you're a single school like I was, I have to go out, I have to speak to the farmer, I have to speak to the producer. We have to know that everything is in place. So all of the paperwork, the health and safety, the registration with the environmental health, the HACCP, but there are many, many opportunities. And those opportunities are getting to know the supplier, getting to know the producer, having the farmers come into the schools and talk about what they do. And we used to do this. We've had the children visiting the farms, we've had the children visiting where the vegetables are grown. And so that is hugely important. The other thing that I think is really important is we have a story to tell. And that story we can tell to the parents, we can give them that reassurance, but they have to know. And I have to say that certainly in schools, I find that we're not very good at blowing our own trumpet. We literally, we just get on with the job because that's what we do. So I can always remember somebody from the Observer actually saying to me, Jeanette, so what do you do in the day? And I said, well, I cook. End of. And she said, no, you do more than that. And this is why I'm saying that we don't really tell our story as we should. And the local economy, you know, the people that certainly in schools usually live just around the corner, a mile away. And we're helping all of those. So we're helping the local shops, we're helping local businesses. And I think that's really important. And I think because of the situation that we are in now, we have got this fantastic opportunity to really, really push this forward. And I hope that we all do. And you can scale this up, and it is being scaled up. I know a lot of companies who do support local, who are looking about local. But we need to be open, we need to be honest with people about what we're doing. And so, yeah, so let's make 2021 the year of where we really, really push for local suppliers, we support British farmers, something that I'm passionate about. A lot of my friends are farmers. So, you know, let's give a big shout out for what we actually do. Thank you.
Okay, Jeanette, thank you very much for that. Passionate as ever. Now we're going to move swiftly along to hear from Preston Walker and James Ball, who lead the catering team at Oak House Residential Home and run the Oak House Kitchen Healthcare Catering Consultancy. So, Preston and James, are you ready? And do you believe local sourcing can work in the care sector?
Absolutely. I think it's probably worthwhile just explaining where my sort of passion with ingredients. I've been very blessed over the years with our location being in Rutland, fantastic part of the world, and surrounded by great suppliers and producers. And I started my career in '93 at a local restaurant, which taught me the understanding ingredients and the importance of using ingredients at the peak of their condition to get the best out of them on a plate for diners. So I had a huge background in hospitality and hotels and restaurants before I moved across into healthcare. But really, it doesn't change. It's really important, and a lot of the producers that I work with now are the same producers that I've worked with since, you know, the mid-90s. You know, these are relationships that have been forged over many, many years. You know, I regard them as friends of mine, and you know, it's fantastic, you know, to use these people and support these businesses in that way. And it, you know, as I said, we're perfectly placed. I think one thing is really important from a care home perspective, and something that we are all really missing at the moment is interaction with the community, with what's going on. And certainly something I've noticed, you know, over the last 12 months, you know, we rely on that connection between the local community. Quite regularly, I would have people at the back door with, you know, a glut of plums or a glut of tomatoes for us to use within the home. And I just love the way that we can, you know, use these ingredients and support the community and have those relationships with people like that. I do think as well, it's, you know, you mentioned earlier on about the cost of British food, and really, you know, my approach, you know, within care home catering is the same as what it was in a restaurant kitchen. You know, highly skilled chefs that understand how to use ingredients to the best of their ability. You know, really important that we are, you know, obviously not wasting food, and being able to use excess ingredients or leftovers in other dishes can obviously certainly help and support to reduce the cost. And you know, we're able to, you know, provide a really varied menu. Healthcare catering has changed tremendously over the years since I've been full-time involved with healthcare catering since 2008. We're caring for a lot more people with complex needs. People are very savvy about catering. You know, we're caring for a generation now that have traveled, that have experienced lots of different foods, and that's something that we need to obviously focus on and incorporate into our menus. But I think one of the real challenging things is all the range of special medical diets that we have to contend with, and that's a real challenge. And there's a hell of a lot of skill that's needed for that, you know, completely different skill set to what I experienced before I came across into healthcare. So that's another challenge that we need to consider. And certainly, I think the spotlight that's been shone on healthcare this year, you know, there's great opportunities within this sector. And you can make a huge difference to people's lives on a daily basis.
I remember when I turned up, Preston, didn't I? Turned up essentially with about half a ton of broad beans. It was that part of the season, and they've been grown in my allotment. And the horror on everyone's faces, I said, right, let's get down and prep this. But this is the seasonality of life in Britain. There are things which are in abundance at certain periods of the year, and then at other times they're less available or unavailable. I mean, there was a question that's been raised by Andy Jones on seasonality. Now, one of the things that's been developed through Preston's relationships with the suppliers is we talk to them. We're able to get that added value that Alexia's talking about by saying, well, what have you got? What is it that we've got available right now that I can put into a menu that is now going to be very cost effective? And it's going to give me something seasonal, which allows our residents to engage with the outside world and see and experience life as they had beforehand. And it really does make everyone's added value so much better than the cost itself. But before I came and worked for Preston, I was working in large care home groups where my budget was £3 a day. And actually, it's not necessarily the ingredients that are the costly aspect when we look at output. It's about the whole, you know, what is the cost of creating the food, the skills, the people, the power, essentially, and the ingredients are part of that. And with highly motivated people, well skilled, and they will be more motivated and more skilled if you give them good ingredients from localities and they're learning about seasonality. It has a massive effect on the whole experience and the way that it works. To focus just on an ingredient as such and to say, well, it's going to be more costly or less costly or whatever else is a difficult thing to form a circle from. But what has been evident, and I think it's very clear, Preston, from the things that we've been developing with an approach to all sorts of diets is, and it's been mentioned again by both Jeanette and Alexia, is if something is set in stone, We think that that's going to be clever. We think that's going to work, but it comes up against life and it doesn't work effectively for a period of time. So we need some flexibility in there. And that requires people to understand how to change and use things. So we're very lucky in Preston's care home where we can pick up the phone, speak to people, change a particular fish to another one because it's now available, and we can put specials on. If we are stuck on a menu that has to be brought out every week or every month, and it's not changed because that's done elsewhere, then I may find myself in a season where I'm having to get ingredients to make the menu work and they don't fit within our particular availability within the UK. And so there's a complex aspect to it, but the principles are clear, and the value to that is far better for everyone.
Certainly is important. I think giving the chefs that flexibility, their own artistic license. You know, we quite often will have dishes on the menu that will leave it to their, you know, picking a particular flavour crumble depending on what's in season. We will leave it for them to decide that, and that's really important. And sometimes quite difficult because, yeah, okay, you know, we're quite unique. We're a one-site, 25-bedroom care home. So how do you offer a more localized solution if you're involved with a large care group? And it can be done. You know, there can be a certain amount of the menu that is standardized, but again, allowing the chefs the freedom to put local specialties on. And we've got, you know, I live in the middle of the Stilton villages, so we've got fantastic cheeses on our doorstep here and Melton Mowbray pork pies, but another part of the country might not want to put something like that on. So it gives the chef the flexibility to use those products. It resonates with the clients that they're catering them for as well, because these are foods that they've grown up with and enjoyed all their time. So it's a very exciting sector to be in, and I think, you know, lots of opportunities really, particularly with what we're going through at the moment. It's made us all sit up and listen and think about where we're sourcing things, and there is so much on our doorstep. We're very fortunate.
Can I just sort of intercede at this point here? You're both talking essentially about sort of agile menus, flexibility, and giving the sort of chefs the discretion to use their sort of local knowledge and skills. Is the skills of the average chef in the care sector up to being able to handle all of that?
I think, you know, it's constantly evolving, isn't it? You've only got to look at medicinal care. Medicinal care these days is tailored to the individual, and catering is going very much the same way. So it's understanding the different needs of people. You know, for example, for my 25 residents, I could be cooking half a dozen different variations of a dish to make it suitable for all of my clients. So yes, to answer your question, yes, it is a challenge. We've constantly got to train and innovate to try and find solutions for this. As you know, David, myself and James are very passionate, particularly about people who acquire dysphagia diets, so pureed foods, and people have swallowing problems, and this can be a real challenge to people. And you know, quite frankly, it's one of the major, well, it is the major intervention. You know, for many people with this condition, there may not be alternative treatments. Changing the texture of the food, that is the prescribed diet for that individual, and obviously getting that wrong can, you know, severely impact and harm people. So it's important that we do understand the risks. We do have the knowledge of how to prepare food safely, effectively for people, so we can treat and care for people in the right way.
I think, David, one of the aspects of the question, which is an incredibly valid question, is on the skills. But the skills are no different to basic skills in any catering environment: chopping, you know, simmering, cooking, all those such. I appreciate that I haven't gone through a great list, and I feel like I'm struggling. But basic cookery, culinary skills, and by having the basic core skills, you can then do almost anything with those skills, because you can apply them to different dishes, different ingredients you get hold of, and then the residents actually get variety and choice specific to them. That needs to be addressed by policymakers, by the organisations who are providing food in care settings, because that is part of their requirement for their licence. So if that is the basis, we can go down the route, and they're very valid and necessary, where we have things which we can buy in already made, but that severely limits choice. And then what we're doing is we are putting people into boxes of what is available to them, and you might get a bit of a hit or miss. Whereas if you have the skills, and they're only basic skills, we're not talking about bringing people to advanced levels of gastronomic. We're just talking about really basic cookery skills that they can be applied with better ingredients, with better choice, and with individuals in mind. And I appreciate that that is different across larger settings, but when we then look at bigger groups, bigger organizations who have someone who are creating menus potentially, or creating procurement lists, well, then they need to have the skills and the foresight to know that their role within changing menus, options, availability of food related to the skills available in their organization. It all matches up. And if we have someone sitting in isolation, whether it's an isolation in the kitchen without controls but trying to do their best, or someone who's sitting in an office who's trying to give a really easy, systematic approach to doing something for that organization, unless it matches up, you're going to get problems.
Okay, thank you. I think now it's probably a good opportunity to start to open up the webinar and take some of the questions that have been coming in. So joining Alexia, Jeanette, Preston and James, we also have on the panel Steve Glencross of the Good Food Partnership. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, David. Good morning. Thanks for having me on the panel.
Okay, just before we get started, can you tell us just briefly how the partnership can help caterers who are looking to source more local produce?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been fascinating for the kind of last half an hour or so, listening to the guys talk, and the passion around local food and sourcing, some of the consistencies and some of the challenges out there. And hopefully, look, we're here to help bridge that gap. So as you said, we're a procurement consultancy company. Our focus is on supporting the in-house catering teams in the education and healthcare sector. We help them source great food and ingredients within the constraints of their budgets. However, I think the really important point to make, and kind of backing up what Alexia said, was we do this without compromising on the quality of the food. And I absolutely believe that that's key. This is not about a race to the bottom. We should be able to source great quality local ingredients within the constraints of a public sector budget. What sets us apart a little bit from the other companies out there, so look, we're owner managed, we're an independent company, but that makes us really flexible and nimble, and we take that whole of market approach. So I guess if we're looking in the context of today's webinar, that whole of market approach is really important, because alongside the key relationships that we've got with the big national distributors, we also champion the inclusion of smaller local artisan suppliers, and we're absolutely passionate about integrating them into the supply chain. We've heard from all the guys about all the good stuff about why we should be doing that, whether it's reducing carbon footprint, reducing food miles, but as an end user, that's also giving you the real confidence and the visibility of where your food's coming from. Alexia talked about cost earlier on, and this is one of the big challenges. But for me, in real simple terms, something that's local and in season and in abundance, as James and Preston said, this should be fresher, tastier, and actually often it should provide best value when you compare to a standard product. So this is absolutely doable, and it's within our grasp to do this. And just finally, for me, before we kind of open up to questions, we're obviously all acutely aware on this call how tough the last year has been. So by supporting local producers and integrating them into the supply chain, it's absolutely helping the communities that we live in. There was a key word that came out of the webinar a couple of weeks ago, and that was about collaboration. And that feels where we all are right now. We're in this together. It's about collaborating and making this happen, and integrating these guys into the supply chain and unlocking some of that potential that was talked about.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to sort of dive straight in now with a question from Jane Jones, of the chair of Assist, who's sort of taken a real sort of wide angle view of the whole issue here. And she says, How should we be framing the issue of sort of buying more local British post-pandemic? Should we as an industry be pushing this as a driver for economic recovery and inclusive growth for our communities? I guess this is sort of the phrase build back better. Is there an aspect of this that can work in terms of supporting British growers and at the same time increasing volumes within the public sector? Alexia. You're muted at the moment, Alexia.
Okay, I'm here. Jane has just articulated it. I mean, it's not so much a question as a statement. And Jane, I completely agree. And I think we can all learn a lot from the work that is actually happening up in Scotland. I think Scotland's quite far ahead of England and Wales, in fact, in really establishing these strong local supply chains. Local has become part of all of our lives, hasn't it? I mean, so it's just a statement of the obvious, but we are all locked down locally. We all, because of these circumstances, have got a greater awareness of what is available locally, what food is available on our doorsteps. We are all shopping, I'm sure, more in local retailers, and this applies not just for us in terms of managing our own sort of, household budgets and things, but we are acutely aware of how this also applies in our schools, hospitals and care homes. So I think as a catalyst for change, it's actually one of the very positive things that has come out of the coronavirus lockdown. Yes, Jane.
All right, thank you very much. One of the issues that's come up in the questions in several cases is the idea that maybe farmers themselves could be doing a little bit more to promote what they do, but also to look at how they can sort of deliver their products in the sort of the quantities and quality and at the price point that serves the sector. Now, I'd be interested to find out from you what your experience is with your sort of local farmers and growers and how you built those relationships. Perhaps Jeanette, you can give us a bit of an insight into your experience.
Okay, thanks, David. I think for me, it was getting in my car, and I've always said this, I've always told this story, and going and visiting the farmers and saying, right, this is what I need. I don't want fillet steak because I can't afford fillet steak. But what I do want is the mince, for instance. So what I want is better quality. And Alexia, she spoke about this earlier. Because you buy better quality, you don't need as much. And again, I used to, many years ago, say I'm going back 20 odd years now, I used to say that the mince that we used at that time probably came from 10 different cows in 11 different countries. You couldn't really, it was dreadful. And so buying local, I could guarantee to my parents that this is where the meat came from, literally 10 miles down the road. This is where it goes to be slaughtered. This is the story. But as I say, it is using less but better quality. And that is what my numbers went from 110 to 295.
Okay, thank you. Preston, I believe it was you who sort of talked about the conversation with farmers, and I just wonder how you actually went about starting those conversations. Were you like Jeanette, just jumping into your car and driving down to the nearest farm?
Well, to a certain extent, yeah. Like I said, it was those relationships were built from the restaurants that I used to work in at the time, and I continued to use those guys. And over the years, they have become friends of mine, and I still use them to this day. To give an example, one of the local butchers that we use, very much like Jeanette's, he will source his meat from particular farms. And I'm sure if I asked him, he could tell me the name of the beast. We've got full traceability on it, but that's so important. But those relationships, I used to go on shoots with him. We would take me around the slaughterhouses, around the farm, around his production unit to actually understand his operation that will give him a good insight into ours and healthcare and what he can do to support that too. You know, it's about creating those friendships, and they evolve.
Okay, thank you.
David, could I just jump in there from our side of things? I think you know there's a responsibility from procurement companies, from framework providers, and to end users to make this easy for the farmers as well and the smaller local suppliers. Again, it was touched on earlier on. Public sector can be a bit of a minefield. It can be a bit of a scary exercise to kind of go into that unknown, to look at what used to be an OJU compliant tender. A lot of these guys don't know where to start. So from our perspective, it's about making that process really easy for them. It's about holding their hand. It's about writing tenders in plain English, making sure that there's somebody on hand to help support them through that process, and to make sure that when the process is put out there, that it doesn't disadvantage the smaller guys that don't have the big back of house resources. I think that's absolutely key.
Okay, thank you. Alexia, to take up that point from Steve there, I mean, who would you see sort of taking responsibility for developing those sorts of frameworks and specifications?
Well, at a national level, I think this is already on the government agenda, encouragingly.
Yeah.
So at a national level, I think there is agreement that frameworks are clumsy, unwieldy, too time-consuming to manage, and utterly terrifying for small producers and farmers. So I think that's on the government agenda. I think it is going to change. Anyone who's worked with me will know that I'm quite let's make it happen now. And my understanding of the timescales is that the changes are going to be quite slow, which I find frustrating. And so therefore, it puts the onus on many of the people listening to this webinar and all the other fabulous catering managers out there to see if they can do, like Steve has just talked about, and emulate what Jeanette, James and Preston have done by going out there and literally meeting and greeting the farmers and talking to them and helping them. I don't think we can just sit back and say, hey, or we're going to just wait for the government to make it easier for us. I think we have to seize the initiative and go out there in your local community. I mean, incredibly interesting, rewarding thing to do. But I mean, I take my hats off to James, Preston and Jeanette for what they've done, because that's hard work. But what they've achieved is so admirable, and you know, they're reaping the benefits long term, aren't they?
Okay, thank you. James, can I bring you in here? You gave us the story about the turning up with the beans.
Broad beans, yes.
Broad beans. And obviously this sort of plays into this sort of the seasonality where some things will suddenly become abundant at a reasonable cost. Obviously, if you're sort of a small restaurant, you can perhaps tweak your menu quite easily to do something like that. How practical is it to work in that way for you know, big care homes, which you said you've also worked in?
Well, the bringing of your own allotment broad beans to a kitchen, the horror, because the workload, you see, the thing is you bring all that along and now you've got to spend an awful lot of time doing that, and that isn't necessarily structured in to the day. But the idea is, and it's more a principle, you've got to work in principles, because people have got to apply things as it works on the ground, is in a larger scale organization, it may not be the kitchen's role to have that complete autonomy to go and look into what is seasonal. It may well be, but from a management point of view, you tend to find that there's more controls up the system. But then somebody somewhere is or does need to have the responsibility for doing that, so it's not missed. Because if it is missed, then the knock-on effects to the kitchen are that they continue in the way that they had happened. And people tend to they respond to communications in, we're going to do this, I can order this now because that's changed on my order sheet, I can now put that into a menu because that suggestion's been given to me, and I just flow in that way. It's probably unrealistic where people get into a habit of work, unless that habit is to be creative and to change menus themselves, for them to actually engage in that way. So someone, if they want that, then there has to be a way of working that in the organization that's actually doing it. Preston's example of a crumble, as an example, where there is an abundance of a particular fruit, that is now on the menu. It then goes through. If it is forgotten about to change it as that abundancy disappears, and that is still on the menu, the habits tend to be, well, we'll order more expensive fruits from a different country because that's what I'm being told to do, unless there is a different mechanism in place.
Okay, Steve, we've got a question here. Well, first of all, it makes a bit of a statement saying, do you think supermarkets are to blame for stocking items at all times of year? And I suppose to take that point, do you think we've got a little bit lazy when it comes to sort of the seasonality of goods, and because we have been spoilt by the fact that supermarkets can supply almost whatever we want year round?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it goes back to the previous point. I think there is a responsibility on us as consumers as well. So look, we're all in the food service industry, but actually we're all consumers as well. And if we go back to the fundamentals of seasonality, we need to practice what we preach, if you like. So you know, I think I saw a comment earlier on. So strawberries aren't in season all year round. So let's not be buying them all year round. Let's buy the great fruit and vegetables that are in season all year round. And I think to the previous points, this doesn't need to be overly complicated. It's not about changing menus every day, every week. Let's just work with the wonderful seasons that we have in the UK and celebrate that. I think if we go back to the schools example, you know, termly menus work really well, but you can kind of lock in those ingredients at great pricing, but still giving the flexibility and reflect what's out there in abundance in the marketplace. So this can be look as complicated or as simple as we want it to be.
And can I just say there as well, Steve, just to be, sorry, Preston, but you know, say we all enjoy strawberries, everyone obviously likes strawberries, but strawberries are great. But our impression of that wonderful bowl of strawberries that we eat is when it was in June, when they were warm, when it was delicious, and not when we saw them on a shelf in December and but I remember the strawberries from the summer, so I'll pick them up now because they're here. And I take them home and I go through the process of eating strawberries because something in me as a human being just makes me do it. Do you know, that is just, if they're available to you at the point where they're not at their best, why? I mean, tomatoes are another, you know, buying tomatoes now from the UK, unless they've been grown under special conditions, which will make them very expensive, but they're just they're not going to taste the same as we want them to taste. We go through we like cheese and tomato sandwiches, so we'll have cheese and tomato sandwiches all year round. Well, there are other things which are far nicer in season if we're exposed to those and have that sort of motivation or what have you.
Okay, thank you. Preston, did you have something to say?
I was just going to say, I don't think we should forget, you know, the emotional side in connection with food as well. And I think, you know, Jeanette will agree, you know, certainly a little work that I've done with schools, you know, educating children about, you know, the seasons is really important, giving them exposure to things that they may not have experienced before. And, you know, also involve, you know, my residents as well. You know, I've got, you know, 25 kitchen assistants. You know, when James turns up with a bag of broad beans, you know, it's a food related activity and everyone's around the table popping them. But, you know, these are really important memories to tap into. It gets people excited about food. Ultimately, it makes people want to eat more. They're looking forward to that meal. So, you know, I think that social connection is really, shouldn't be lost anyway.
Okay. Jeanette, was that your experience at school in that the buying local, and you talked about having the farmers come in to visit, it was an educational exercise as much as anything else?
I think Preston's spot on it. In fact, that's what I'll put my hand up for. Education is so important, not just for children. We have forgotten what the seasons are, and so we have to re-educate. So we have to educate children, but we also have to educate parents, and I think that's crucial. But what I just want to say one very quick thing. Alexia brought this up earlier, talking about Scotland. Scotland is very different to England for the simple reason that we are very fragmented as an industry. We have got all different sorts of private contractors, local authorities, in-house, etc. Whereas Scotland has been very clever, and they just have local authorities in the main. And they also have fantastic food, and we do as well. But they've stuck to having a local authority contract for public services. And I think that's hugely important.
Okay, well, possibly then I think the final question we've got time for, as we're sort of starting to run out now, is someone's talked about the discussion of that we should have a minister for hospitality. And Alexia, I wonder if I could turn to you on this to say that the question is, would this be a role that could be adapted to buy British food, but also perhaps to add Jeanette's point about perhaps some sort of national buying structure as well. Is that something you could see being rolled up into a sort of a minister for hospitality if we had one?
Well, I completely support the move to a minister for hospitality. I think it's a really good idea. Could this be part of that person's role? That's an interesting one. Yes, why not? But as long as they do something. Yeah, I mean, it needs to be action, not talk. And the huge frustration is that the people who are forwarding questions, the people who are on this webinar, the people who are speaking on it, you are all action people. You are all people who, despite the challenges, despite the fact that, as Jeanette has just described, it's actually jolly difficult in England, it's much easier in Scotland, you have all used your own initiative, you care about this passionately, and you're trying to make it work. And I just, when I hear that a minister's taking responsibility for something, I mean, it's just so terrible, but I don't get overly excited because where's the action? And then of course, so if we are going to get a minister, let's get somebody who is going to work with us, work with the industry, work with the people, with James and Preston, not oh God, you got me on something that makes me feel almost cross. If I heard there was a minister for hospitality, I wouldn't be doing a jig. I'd be just saying, well, hey, watch this space. Let's just see. But the energy and the ideas are here. They're in the industry. You guys can deliver this, and that's why I love working with you all.
Okay, right. Well, thank you very much for that, Alexia. Sadly, we've sort of pretty much run out of time now. We've got our hour up. So first of all, thank you to Alexia, Jeanette, Preston, James, and Steve, and to all of you for joining us for this webinar. There's going to be a full link to a full recording of the webinar available on the Public Sector Catering website next week. On the slides coming up, you can see the webinars that we have coming along for you, as well as the names of the suppliers who support the Public Sector Catering 100 group, and without whom events such as today's webinar would not be possible. So goodbye from us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.